verse number 10.
And you have some copies of that? We need some copies, made.
You can have that one. Or we...
Let me go back to it.
All right, moving forward. Any more comments? Verse number 24. And ye shall observe the thing for the ordinance to thee and thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when ye come into the land he will give you. So verse 24 and following talks about they're going to go back to the land that was promised to Abraham and so forth. It tells them what to gather up. The children will say in the years to come, why do we do that? Why are we partaking of this ceremony? Verse 26, it shall come to pass when your children shall say, what meaneth by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, and smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. And the people bowed down and worshipped. Here we have Moses telling the people a little bit what this is about and how you teach your children in the future generations. But then they bowed down. And verse number 28, they did as the Lord commanded. It's interesting to see the nation of Israel and their progression. Often you see them, if they got a strong leader, they're obedient, they do what the Lord asks them to do. Then other times they're rebellious and they go against God's teaching. But here, they're fixing to be released, fixing to be free. They bow down, they worship God, they take of the Passover feast as they were instructed to do. They did what the God commanded them to do. So did they, verse 28. So the things are ready. They've done what they've been told to do. Then you go to verse 29. And it came to pass that at midnight. This would be midnight on day 15 of the month. Still dark. Now they were told to take this Passover, they were told to keep their shoes on, their clothes, be clothed, not have any yeast in the bread, be ready to move quickly. So here we start the moving process. Starts at midnight. In the dark. So at midnight, the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Regardless of what the destroyer was, it's still the Lord that did it. The Lord took the life of the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on the throne, the firstborn of the captive that was down in the dungeon, and everybody in between. The firstborn lost their life. And in this process, verse number 30, Pharaoh got up. He woke up. Now, I don't know what woke him up. If I'm sound asleep, it usually takes some kind of noise or something to wake me up. I don't know if there was an outcry from his firstborn that was dying. But for whatever reason, he woke up, and all of his servants, and all of the Egyptians, and it says, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for every house experienced this. Every house in Egypt that night at midnight, there was death experienced. Can you comprehend that? The crying that's going on in all these houses. Now, customary back then, at least in the New Testament era, and I'm assuming it goes back as early as this, that families frequently stayed together. In the New Testament time frame, if a young man married a young woman, they would just build on a room to their father's house, and they would all stay together, sort of in a colony. So in all likelihood, in Egypt, all these households had their firstborn of some form within that house. So every house experienced death. And there was weeping, and there was wailing, and there was crying. But see, something similar to this happened 80 years earlier. 80 years prior to this, it was because of Pharaoh that they sent out the instructions, all the little boy babies be thrown into the river, because they feared the population of the Egypt. So all the little Israelites, the Hebrew babies this time, 80 years earlier, there was death throughout all the Hebrews. Now here we are, still basically responsible for Pharaoh. There's death of the Egyptians. Every house experienced this. Your thoughts?
You know, two things. One, it even said the firstborn of the livestock.
Even the cattle.
So,
Yeah.
not only is it the firstborn of the human, it's the firstborn of the livestock, which puts a hardship on them later on.
It crippled them physically, it crippled them financially. Yeah.
A lot of people have the misconception that when it says the firstborn of the house, that they're just talking about maybe small children or not. I mean, you're talking about grown adult people. That might have been only one son or one daughter to the home.
It could.
And if they were married, then they've been left without a dad.
There's a lot of widows.
There's a lot of widows.
But if the...
Now it says firstborn, and normally in that time frame, when it talks about people, population, such as talking about men, but it could be women as well.
Well, it doesn't say man or woman.
It doesn't say man or woman, and you think it's always a little bitty kid. It could be a 40-year-old man. You know, so it was a devastating day for sure. Others?
So it could have been an old man, your great-grandpa, if he is still alive.
If he's still alive, and he has a firstborn son,
Or if he is the firstborn.
yeah.
And so, and it could have, I always thought it was the men, but it was firstborn, period.
Probably was just the men, although not stated.
It's not saying.
But the way their attitude toward people at that time, man was a dominant figure, and that's usually who they made reference to, but it doesn't say it's just the men. It says the firstborn. And it doesn't say just little children, it's firstborn of any age. And so I can't put my hand around that. I cannot visualize the feeling that was going out throughout the land. And it all points back to the hard-heartedness of Pharaoh. Pharaoh and his arrogance was directly a result of this. And so you have down here in verse number 31, Pharaoh, now we're still in the middle of the night, he calls for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise up, get you forth from among my people, both you and your children." In other words, leave. But I find it interesting because if you remember back in chapter 10 and verse number 28, I believe it is, that's when Pharaoh had his last conversation with Moses and said, "I don't want to see you anymore. If I see you again, you will die." And now, Pharaoh takes the initiative to go and find Moses and Aaron. He did not kill Moses and Aaron. Instead, what he told them to do was get your stuff and leave. Now, here's the point I want you to understand. You rise up, both the children of Israel, and you take your flocks and your herds, and I want you to leave. And he sent them out. Verse number 31, the Egyptian said, you leave it now. Verse 33, the Egyptians, they came upon them and they said, send them away in haste, or else we'll all be dead men. And the people, they took their stuff. Now they're packed up, ready to go, because Moses told them to. So here we are sometime before daylight, still at after midnight. The people come to the Israelites, said, go. They gathered up their stuff in number 35, and the children did according to what Moses said, and they took the Egyptians, was willing to give them jewelry, they was willing to give them other possessions. They had livestock of their own, the Hebrews did, although they were slaves, they still had some livestock. They took all of their stuff. And it's almost like the end of verse number 36 and they spoiled the Egyptians. Normally when a country goes in and conquers another country, they would take what they say the spoils of that country. They would take the valuable possessions and things that they wanted. This is the way the Israelites were. The Egyptians was willing to give them anything they wanted just to get them out of here. And so they gave them possessions. They gave them jewelry and valuables. They gave them gold. They gave them clothing. Leave. Just leave. It's what they wanted. And so, they're on their way. Brings us to verse number 37. Before we go to 37, your thoughts?
You know, back up there when you said what's called about the hardness of Pharaoh's heart, it's just a reminder of us that you can't outlive God, you can't outgive God, and you can't outthink God, and too many people today believe that.
Yeah.
And even as Christians, and even members of the church, you know, they're still having their mindset sometimes that, hey, you know, we can
do it our way.
We can do it our way. And,
yep.
you know, we have to remember that.
Others?
Larry?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have my glasses on, forgot them, but you said that 80 years prior to this happening, it happened to the Hebrews, and that was through...
That was back in Genesis, Exodus chapter 1 and 2.
Yeah.
When the Pharaoh come on into power that knew not Joseph,
Okay.
and he feared the uprising population of the Hebrews that was beginning to be so numerous, that he issued a decree that all the little babies be killed, be thrown into the river. That's when Moses was born.
Okay, is this...
And he was in the basket, and they rescued Moses.
Is this the same Pharaoh?
No.
Oh, it's a different Pharaoh.
A different Pharaoh.
But they're still...
When Moses grew up at age 40, he saw one of the Hebrews being mistreated, and he killed the Egyptian, and then he was forced to leave the country. And he went over to the country of Meridian and stayed as a shepherd, working for his father-in-law, Jethro. 40 years as a shepherd, which makes him now age 80, it says the Pharaoh died, and another Pharaoh took power, and so you can go back now
I remember
to
that
Egypt.
now. I remember that now.
So this is a different Pharaoh.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Oh,
I'll scratch my
okay.
head.
37. It seems like the children of the Hebrews, they sort of collected at a place called Ramesses. And so, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. That's another village that was built by the slaves early on in the early Pharaohs, back earlier in the book of Exodus. That's toward the east, toward the Red Sea. It says there's 600,000 of them on foot that were men besides children. So that's the men, the Hebrews, that was leaving Egypt. 600,000 men on foot, besides the children. Now, I don't know if the word men there includes both male and female, just generically describing them. Now, let's assume it was. Let's assume the men there means men and women. How many children do you think they had on the average? In our country, I would say the average family size is probably 3 children. If they had 3 children, you're up to 1.8 million. Maybe more. I guess 2.4 million. Count the men and then 3 children. If you had wives, that's not including the men. If the men include just the men and they're married, that'd be 1.2 million if the wives. Then you throw in the children on top of it. You could be having anywhere from 5 to 10 million people. That's a caravan. And they go to the Red Sea, and the Red Sea is parted. We'll talk about this more, but I read did some study on that one time, and your pictures you see in the movie The Ten Commandments, the Red Sea parted, and they walk through 3 or 4 wide and a little narrow. You can't get that many 10 million people through there in a little narrow passage in one day. Some did a calculation. The Red Sea had to have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 miles in width for that many people to cross through. That opening had to be. We're talking about a huge, huge population of people. Two years later, if you jump over to Numbers chapter number 1, in the first chapter of Numbers, it starts off giving a census of the children of Israel. 2 years later, according to verse 3 and verse 4, or verse 2 and verse 3, they took a census of the men over the age of 20. They wanted men that was old enough to go to war. The men over the age of 20, 2 years after this, Numbers 1, verse number 46, 603,550 men. That's those that's over the age of 20. The number has grown from when they left Egypt. 600,000 men. So here we got these men on foot leaving, including their children, including their livestock, including all their possessions. Now let's think about you being Moses and trying to lead this many, many people. I've often wondered how he could communicate and all those people could hear him.
Larry, if you look on down to verse 49, though it says only the tribe of Levi was not numbered, so it was actually the number was bigger than
there was more. Well, and this verse talks about there's also added to them a mixed group. The next verse. So added to that number, you got down number 38, and a mixed multitude. Now, who could that possibly be? Well, we don't know. Some have speculated maybe it's non-Hebrew people that married into the clan and part of them. Maybe the others sent a way to get out of Egypt and joined up with them. We're not told who they were, but they're described as a multitude. So you add the Levites, you add this other multitude, you've got a huge, huge population of people. Now try to imagine yourself being Moses and somebody comes up and says, what are we going to have for supper? Where are we going to find water, Moses? Because that's exactly what happened as time goes on. And it's interesting about this mixed group of people. Over in Numbers chapter 3, I believe it is. No, Numbers chapter 11 and verse number 4. As they're out in the desert area making their way toward the promised land, they begin to complain about food. And Numbers 11 verse 4 says it's this mixed group of people that leads the complaint. This non-Hebrew people that's part of them, they were the ones that started all the complaining and griping and fussing. But as Moses is leading them out, they're part of the group. Maybe they were other prisoners or slaves that the Egyptians had brought in besides the Hebrews. We're not really told who they were. But it's great, another great multitude added to the population as they're making their way out. Your thoughts? Yes, sir.
We've already gone back and forth in Numbers, and I had a reference to Numbers 33,
Yes?
verses 3 through 5, and it's talking about the same departure.
It says on the 15th day of the month, right?
But it's kind of looking, to me, showing what the Egyptians are kind of seeing too, because, you know, you're talking about this number of people leaving, and it says, and they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month on the morrow after the Passover. The children of Israel went out with the high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians, for the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten among them, upon their gods. Also the Lord executed judgment, and the children of Israel removed from Ramses and pitched in Sukkot.
Right.
So they're burying their dead and watching this great number of people leave.
That's their workforce.
Yeah, and with a lot of their loot, as we've already said.
They're losing a lot.
Yes.
The Egyptians are. But they cost them.
Yeah.
Cost them dearly, and they bury their dead, and then they sort of come to the reality of what they're losing, and so they come in pursuit. Good thought.
Murray.
Where was that found?
Numbers 33.
3 through 5.
11, 11:33.
No, 33.
So beginning of verse 39, they gathered up the stuff, they took the unleavened cakes, they began to leave out of Egypt. They didn't tarry, the text says. Now they sojourned for the children of Israel, number 40, and dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. They had been there 430 years. All of these people had never lived freely. 430 years. They all grew up as slaves. Slavery is all they knew. Living in Egypt is all the kind of lifestyle they had. They never enjoyed the time before living in Egypt. And this was prophesied to Abraham many years ago, that his descendants would be taken away. Now to Abraham it says they would be there for some 400 years. Peter talking in Acts chapter 7, or Stephen rather, in rehearsing the Old Testament events, he says they were there 400 years. Here it says 430 years. In fact, it uses that number twice in this section of Scripture. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there. Maybe in Abraham they just are generally in 400 years frame, but here's what many people think. That the additional 30 years mentioned there is the time that the Hebrews lived in Egypt, when Joseph was there, Jacob, and living in the land of Goshen, when the good Pharaoh was there, before they became slaves. So there was a 30-year period there they lived freely in the land of Egypt. But regardless, they had been slaves for a long, long time. And now they're on the move. They're sojourning away. Heartache is in the land of Egypt. Death in every house. The Israelites are leaving with much of the possession of the Egyptians, and as he pointed out, after a little while, reality soaked in. And you know there was grieving. Every household was grieving over. It's sort of natural for children to bury parents, but for parents to have to bury their children, it's a little bit unnatural. Some of you have experienced that. So there's heartache, crying, weeping and wailing. Verse 42. And in this night, see, it's still dark. Sometime after midnight and daylight. And in this night, to be much observed, the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night of the Lord to be observed of the children of Israel in all generations. The Lord delivered them. They was traveling in the dark, or at night time, on the 15th day of the month. And this is the night that the Lord says, this is what you teach your children. You observe this day. Remember when Jesus took the Passover meal, what time of day was it? In the upper room? It was at night. They continued this tradition or this custom or this observance, and they partook of this meal at night time because of the events right here. Your thoughts?
Larry?
Yes.
I have a question about, you can back up a little bit to verse 37. The Israelites traveled around this to Succoth, about 600,000 soldiers on foot besides families. If they were enslaved, why are they talking about soldiers here if they were enslaved to the Egyptians?
No, I don't.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, what verse are you in now? The 600,000?
Verse 37, where they traveled to Succoth.
Yes.
It says about 600,000 soldiers on foot besides families.
Well,
If they were enslaved, how
they're
could they
not
have
soldiers. They're King James says 600,000 men on foot.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
So they were marching. I mean, it was just,
Yeah.
maybe gave the appearance of soldiers, but they were not soldiers.
No way, it couldn't be.
No. But they were men that was marching on foot. Others, our time is gone. All right, well, we'll pick up on 43 next week and move forward.
Okay, dirty.
There's some rules on the Passover. And that's going to come up next week as we move forward.
Oh, good. Like this one, I said.
Thank you.